So, Mark is a serial entrepreneur who has brought 4 companies from ideation to exit in the past decade. He was a professor and consulted for multinational companies in the aerospace and telco industries in Europe, and is currently the founder of a venture builder fund and board member at a government venture capital fund. So, thank you for being here, Mark. Next up is Stephanie Nash. Stephanie is the Chief People Officer for Chapman Group, a global executive search firm specializing in HR. And she also leads the investments in HR-related technology startups for Chapman Ventures. She has served at some of the Fortune 500 companies, including BHP, Microsoft, Allergan, and most recently, Singapore-based startup Redmart. And then finally to the panel, I'd like to invite Amar Iqbal. Amar is an innovation expert, speaker, and author of The 5 Ways to Innovate. In his recent post at Deloitte Digital, he helped numerous clients on their digital transformation journey. He was also general manager and head of strategy at Deep End, one of Australia's leading digital agencies. So please welcome our panel for today. Thank you for being here. So let me give you your mics. Yes. I think they should all be on. Okay, so given our topic is on innovation, the first question is going to be on innovation to the panel. Using some of the information from Deloitte surveyed 133 chief innovation officers. And when they asked to assess their current innovation capabilities, 25% said their organization's innovation capabilities are non-existent. And 41% said they are currently building these capabilities. Only 11% assess their current innovation capabilities as excellent or leading. And so that number really surprises me given how much is being spent on innovation at the moment. So my question to the panel is, what do you think the barriers are within an organization with regards to expanding their capabilities within innovation? And I think I'm going to ask Amar that, the first person to.
Firstly, I think that is the right question because we're seeing investment is going exponentially, right? So I would say if we run that same survey across the entire C-suite, the person who's probably grinning from ear to ear is the CTO, right? A lot of that investment has been going towards technology, particularly here in Asia. So I always use the analogy of the Ferrari of tech stacks. You've got the latest and greatest technology, but without investing in people innovation, there's no one who knows how to drive the Ferrari. Without investing in processes, we don't have a manual. God forbid the road conditions ever change. We don't know how to change the tires. So what you end up seeing is the Ferrari, it's bright and it's shiny, but it just sits in the garage. It doesn't really shift the business forward. And I'd say in the real world, the manifestation of that is a lot of the innovation labs that we see. Pumping out prototypes, lots of great technology, doing great work, but it's not fundamentally shifting the core business forward. So I would say in terms of what is the barrier, well, we know the solution is to diversify that investment to people, process, and technology. The barrier often tends to be executive buy-in, I think. It's tough to get execs to buy into investing in people innovation, process innovation. As Indranil just said, a lot of that is soft skills. The returns are kind of intangible. Sometimes they take a lot of time. So technology, on the other hand, much more immediate. You can kind of say, hey, we created some efficiencies there. I would say this, if you're looking for a quick first step to get that executive buy-in, really the key to me is to say, how do we take even just the technology investment, be less obsessed with the automation and the efficiency side of things, and more of that investment on delivering better customer experiences. And we see this all the time. I'd say in financial services, for example, you see a lot of consulting briefs actually comes from, hey, we took a form that we used to use with customers to collect data and we put it on an iPad. It's the exact same form. Arguably, the experience is worse because at least paper you can kind of flick back and forth. The iPad gives you a validation error, right? So a lot of those briefs is we created an iPad app, but our distribution partners, our agents, our sales team don't want to use it. Can you tell us why and can you help that? And really the answer is you've kind of made more friction in the sales funnel. And to summarize, basically what you've invested in is you're losing business but just doing it super efficiently. So I'd say, let's flip the script on that a little bit. Let's take some of those tech investments, put it into better customer experience. Your sales and marketing people will be a lot happier. CFO is happier. He's seeing some real returns on his investment. And your CIO now has some really good, tangible stories to go back to the exec and say, hey, listen, here's why we need to invest in longer-term innovation initiatives.
I think that's a great answer. Thanks, Amber. And Stephanie, what do you think the barriers are with an organization to innovation?
Thank you. I think what I would say is not dissimilar to what we heard a little bit earlier today, but I actually believe that some of the most significant barriers that we're seeing with regards to innovation is within organizational culture and leadership. And when employees see that the culture of an organization, which is the operating system that powers the company and is fostered by leaders, is not aligned with the actions and the behaviors that leaders are undertaking within the workforce, they lose trust and they lose belief that innovation is truly valued. And so what we need to see in organizations are values that are defined and articulated, that are measured and monitored, and that are rewarded and recognized that really foster innovation, such as continuous learning and curiosity, rapid experimentation and risk-taking, the ability to challenge the status quo, to have an organization that is inclusive and values and recognizes diverse opinions, experiences, and expertise, and that in return, the sorts of systems and processes that are in place demonstrate that the actions that people take within the organization and the behaviors that they exhibit are truly what is valued, rewarded, recognized, and where we see progression. Because we know that if the culture truly demonstrates that innovation is valued, then it will attract the best employees, it will retain the best employees, and we'll see employees do their best work and be able to deliver on the innovation agenda that is expected of the company.
And would you say that comes from the top, the CEO, the board, or how does that filter through?
I think it has to start from the top, but it's top down and bottoms up. And so I think that the original sort of definition and articulation of a culture comes from the founders of the company, and as it becomes publicly listed, et cetera, it'll be governed by the board, et cetera. But we then need to see the leaders who are up and coming within an organization be progressed and promoted because they're also emulating the behaviors that are expected of the company. We also need to see that the organization is evolving. So as the company diversifies, as the company changes, as it acquires, integrates, et cetera, there will need to be sometimes incremental, sometimes exponential change that's driven within an organization. And it does tend to be top-down identified and top-down driven, but it needs to be demonstrated up and down the organization.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So now we'll move on to human capital. So when we look at one of our portfolio companies, Bank of Nova Scotia, they have an initiative to invest $250 million Canadian dollars over the next 10 years on future skilling their employees to adapt to the digital economy, which seems like a lot, but when you compare it to the billions of dollars that's going into innovation, it actually doesn't look like very much. So what are the barriers within an organization to investing in this area? And are the leading multinational companies doing enough with regards to future skilling their workforce? And I'm going to ask Stephanie, as our human capital expert here, to answer that one.
Number two. Okay. I think, and we heard this a little bit earlier this morning, I think that future skilling is really important. It's really critical. However, I think equally important is the mindset that we're instilling within the employees within our organization and the future employees within our organization and the future leaders. We need to reskill because we know that there's a rapid evolution in technology and the dependency on cloud computing, data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybersecurity, et cetera, requires deep technical skills to be built and developed at a rapid rate. However, we also recognize that we now have access to robust data sets, deep and rich analytics, and we need to know that the people who are accessing and have that data available to them are able to work with it in a responsible and ethical manner. And so we need to see that ability, we just heard about it, in terms of critical thinking, the ability to solve difficult problems, the ability to work and coordinate with others, to demonstrate compassion for the people that we work with, the customers that we're working for, the services that we're offering, and the ability to demonstrate both self-awareness as well as social awareness. So the investment in building skills through learning and development programs is absolutely critical. But in parallel, we also need to think about the investment that we're making in leadership development, from the time that we're hiring and putting people into leadership positions to the time that we're appointing individual contributors to move into management roles, and managers of managers, and managers of teams, and managers of organizations, and managers of business units, et cetera. And we need to ensure that we are, again, building and recognizing and rewarding not only the skills that people are gaining, but also the behaviors and the mindsets that they're exhibiting within the workforce and on behalf of the customers that they're serving.
Okay, that's a fantastic answer. Thanks for that, Stephanie. Mark will come to you on the next question, so I'm going to skip you and go to Amar to answer this one.
Feels like a tennis match, kind of. So I'll tell a story. There was a bank we were working with last year. They were actually doing a lot of these right things. They had invested heavily in people training. One of the showcase pieces was Agile training. So they'd put literally hundreds of employees through Agile Scrum certification. Now, what we were seeing, though, was pushback on that investment. And I think it was mostly because, again, there wasn't really that sort of tangible return on that training. So we were called in. We kind of had to look at what is the impact of all of that Scrum certification. So people go and get these skills in a training environment. They come back to their day job. Nothing else has changed in their day job. Everything is still operating in the same way. So there's still lengthy business cases. There's still hierarchical decision making. You're still siloed in your own department and kind of do your work, throw it over the fence to the next department sort of thing. So a lot of issues kind of going on. And so they weren't really seeing, while you've got that human potential there, the environment wasn't being created to unlock the potential. So speaking of two pizza teams, that's exactly what we did. We piloted network-based teams. So we started with just a handful of these squads of 8 or 9 people, and they were cross-functional. So within the 8 or 9, you'd have someone from legal, compliance, technology, marketing, etc. They're self-managing, which is scary for the business. They don't have to go up through the hierarchy to make business decisions now. And they were running in fortnightly sprints, so they were able to get product in the hands of pilot customers very quickly in weeks rather than months or years. And so lots of immediate business impact came from that. The exec buy-in was from the CEO. He really jumped on top of that program and said, this is just the future way of working for this organization. Within 6 months, network-based teams had been rolled out across a huge percentage of the organization. And they've since gone on to win a whole bunch of awards of, being one of the most innovative banks, etc. There's been a lot of press written about it. So again, it's kind of created that groundswell of support to say it's not just the learning and development program, but we also need to change the ways of working, the supporting processes around it as well.
Okay, so another on organization and culture really within the organization is super important to innovation.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the whole dual transformation concept, you need to change what you're doing while you change how you do it. Yeah. Yeah. Easier said than done, but that's one example where they did it quite well.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, so looking at innovation and human capital separately, but ultimately we are in control of what we create when it comes to designing and implementing innovation within an organization. So I'm going to come to Mark here because I know he has some interesting thoughts and has a lot of experience within the venture capital startup space and finance. So how do you think organizations should incentivize or create structures around innovation? Or perhaps you think they shouldn't bother and they should look at innovation externally through M&A or other means. So what are your thoughts on this, Mark?
At our company, we still believe that almost everything is powered by people, at least till 2029. We try to simplify matters. So we look at all the failures that we have had and the successes, and we've come to a conclusion that most of our team can be divided into 2 categories. Everyone is a runner, but some are good marathon runners and some are good sprinters. So we classify the good sprinters are the ones who are good with innovation and doing startup, the edge organization, and the mothership talents are the marathon runners. So if you try to make the marathon runners run an edge organization, and vice versa, is an absolute disaster. So we've tried it. We've pulled in MNC senior executives to run startups and vice versa, and it didn't work out too well. So if you can kind of understand the employees more, understand what kind of talents you have in your organization, then it's easier to implement the different programs you would like to run in your organization. So we have looked at large companies that innovate internally. While the success stories are there, but anecdotal evidence also show that the success rate is about 10%. So that's a high failure rate. If the management is willing to take on the risk, you can run it in-house, but why not outsource the risk, right? Let the market innovate, pick the best players. Of course, the other extreme is to acquire, to go buy a ready-made, Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club for $1 billion. The verdict is still out, whether it's a good buy or not. So instead of going for, both extremes, co-innovation is great. We feel that hybrid model where you can invest slowly, get to work with the partners, and you find that it's a good company, then you go into a deeper working relationship. So that's our view.
Okay, so M&A would be your preference on?
Yes, M&A, yes, hybrid model.
Hybrid model.
Yeah.
Okay. And Stephanie, within an organization, you think innovation should be through M&A, or you think it's possible to incentivize it within a organization?
I think that organizational structures and systems and processes are what enable breakthrough thinking. And it can depend on where the company is at in its maturity curve and also the overall company strategy and what's happening in the competitive landscape as to whether or not an organization should invest in building from within or buying from outside, and or a combination of the two. And we heard both the presenters earlier this morning talk about the internal building side of things, and from Deloitte called the Edge, from Singtel, the Innovation Lab. And so there are organizations that will choose to build from within by creating innovation hubs or special business units that have a ring fence in terms of people, processes, policies, initiatives that are differentiated for that unique growing or edge company within a larger ecosystem and infrastructure. I think that can work. I think that we see innovation come out of those business units or those innovation labs or hubs, but we have to ask ourselves whether or not they're truly building sustainable and scalable culture of innovation within the broader organization. There's actually no right or wrong answer to this question. It's really a company strategy decision. And then there are cases where you have companies that choose to acquire, and they tend to acquire companies because of the innovation, the people innovation, the process innovation, the technology innovation. And then the question becomes, how fast do they integrate or not those companies? So there's a great opportunity to extract value from a company that's been acquired, but we need to be really thoughtful about the pace and the timing of that acquisition. We can buy companies, we can integrate them very quickly because we believe that we're going to find synergies from a people and infrastructure perspective and or from a leveraging technology or a technology platform perspective. But there's a risk that we integrate too quickly and actually destroy the value and the innovation that we thought we were acquiring in the first place because we integrate them into an older, less innovative part of the business that stifles the innovation that was just acquired, and we therefore as quickly lose the enterprise value that we thought that we had actually acquired. So what becomes really important at the outset is that there's a clear strategic decision around what is the purpose of the acquisition that we're making. Are the leaders who are accountable for integration and therefore the KPIs and the bonuses that are set for them are actually aligned to the ultimate outcomes that we're trying to achieve in terms of preserving the innovation we believe that we acquired?
Great answer. Thank you for that, Stephanie. Okay, so before we move on to the final question, if you have questions for the panel, if you want to go to menti.com and use the code 336660 to put any questions to the panel. If it's to a specific person, please put their name in the question as well. So my final question before we open up the floor. A lot of our audience are in the finance industry. So as an outsider looking in, how would you evaluate an organization's strategy and preparedness with regards to nurturing its assets, for human capital and innovation when we go to companies and speak to them? So I'm going to ask Mark, first of all, to answer that question.
Okay. It's an interesting question. So I've looked into the list of Fortune 500 companies that was listed in 1955. So do we want to have a guess here? How many of these companies are still on the same board as in the original list of Fortune 500 companies? What is the percentage of those companies that are still on the same Fortune 500 list today? Sorry? 1%? Yeah. About 10 to 12%. So we're talking about almost 1 out of 10 companies are still in existence. So how do you get onto the list? You look at the revenue and how well they serve their customers. So if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, they're not even able to kind of hold their revenue to stay on the list, let alone innovate and even make more. So what I would how I would gauge an organization is to evaluate and see if there is a clarity in vision. Clarity in vision meaning, does the management understand the difference between innovation and commercialization? So I think Geoff Nicholson at 3M, father of 3M, he said, R&D is how you convert money into knowledge. And innovation is how you convert the knowledge into money. So the way I will benchmark an organization is to ask the question, are you innovating for the sake of innovating? Or are you innovating because you can use that knowledge to produce revenue from your clients? So are you listening to your customers? I think this was a recurring theme for many of our speakers. So I would look at that as a more holistic picture rather than focus on innovation alone.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you for that. And Amar?
I really like that answer as well. So it reminds me, there's a really good story that Richard Rummelt tells in his book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, The Difference in Why It Matters. Oldie but a goodie. Please check it out if you haven't. So he talks about in the mid to late 90s, he was a management consultant and he was sent out on an assignment to interview 26 CEOs of top tech companies. And we're talking about people like Michael Dell, Bill Gates, like the cream of the crop. So he asked them, what do you think has created this huge boom in technology? All of them kind of talked about external factors, the reduction in cost of processor speed, the rise of personal computing. Basically, the reason there's such a boom right now, it's all external factors. He then followed up and said, so what's your organizational strategy to ride that wave? And they gave obviously a variety of answers, but most of them actually talked about internal factors. Our logistics and supply chain operations are improving, we're making engineering better, etc. So they agreed that the thing that had created the boom is external, focus of the strategy is internal. Fast forward 18 months. Steve Jobs had just come back to Apple and he got the opportunity to interview him. So he asked the same question, and when he got to the point of what's your organizational strategy, Steve Jobs just smiled and said, I'm going to wait for the next big thing. As in wait for the external change that's going to happen. And as we know that was Napster disrupting the music industry. Apple jumped on that, created iTunes, iPod. It created a wave that we're still seeing. It went from music to all of media. If you look at Netflix, Spotify, Hulu, Disney Plus, etc., that whole industry has been disrupted, and it kind of started from the legitimacy that iTunes brought to it. So 3 lessons I would take away from that. Apple were very good at understanding their own capabilities link. They had been playing at the intersection of the arts and technology for many years. They knew they were bigger, had more influence in the industry than a startup like a Napster could compete with. Second thing, they were willing and able to step outside of their comfort zone. Now it sort of makes sense, but back then in kind of the 90s, early 2000s, to think of a computer company moving into the music industry seems a bit ludicrous, but it was just adjacent enough that it made sense that they could transfer those capabilities there. And thirdly, they were able to turn what could have been a threat into an opportunity. So there's external change. How can we ride that wave? So let's translate that to today. If I'm looking outside in at an organization, I want to say, are they a good innovator? Ask yourself 3 questions. Do they understand their strengths? Can they play outside of their comfort zone? And are they able to turn a threat into an opportunity? If the answer to those 3 is yes, they're probably a good innovator, and they will still be on the Fortune 500, hopefully many, many years from now.
Thanks, I love that, and that's very practical advice. Thank you, Amar. Okay, so I have a couple of questions from the audience. So the first question, are corporates killing startups? They have deep pockets, want to develop in-house, can protect the IP, and don't need to actually look externally for new ideas and products. And I think you kind of touched upon this, Amar, in your answer just there. But do you want to take this one and then?
Sure. I always thought the narrative was that startups are killing corporates. That's kind of what we're seeing, right, in terms of we talk about industry disruption and that sort of thing. I've always said in my career as an innovation consultant, a big part of my job is, cheesy I know, but helping corporates think, act and behave more like a startup, which is not to say a corporate can be a startup, and nor should they want to. They're bigger, they've got more capabilities. I think, again, as Indranil's graph showed, businesses are slow to adapt. How do you bring some of the lean, agile, design thinking type methods and ways of working from the startup world into the corporate? That's really what they need to survive. So my answer would be no, actually. I don't think corporates are killing startups. I actually kind of think it's the other way around.
Stephanie or Mark, would you like to?
I think there's space and room for both. And I think that those who can identify the opportunity within the challenges will succeed. And so the startups are innovating. They're seeing things faster and able to respond more quickly. And therefore, if they're able to find the potential customer or the problem that they're trying to solve at a more rapid pace than a corporate, they're going to win. And I think that there is the opportunity, but we do have a place and a need for the corporates because they have been around for a long time. They have demonstrated expertise. They have market share, distribution channels, lots of commercial viability, which is really important. So I think the question isn't whether or not one or the other will succeed. It's how do both coexist in a complementary manner, and how does one learn from the other both ways? Because as a startup is scaling, they do need processes and systems that have been put in place in corporates and have worked for a period of time. And then for corporates, the question becomes, when is it time to put aside those processes and systems that have worked for us for as long as they have but are no longer relevant? And therefore, what can we learn from the startups who we're coexisting in various markets with?
Thank you. And Mark, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I just want to maybe remind us all that the current multinational companies were all startups once, right? So it's a fair game.
Okay, so I'm afraid we're out of time. We need to run the breakout sessions. So I'd like to give a round of applause to our fantastic panel here.